Hello.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Okay. For some reason, is this it? Yes. So we are right here. It's a long chapter. Look at this chapter. This is verse. This is Samach would be 62. We're on verse 62. So very, very long chapter there. V'yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachai ro'i. Isaac. So remember, Rebecca's on her way back to the land of course, at this point, it's the land of Canaan, but Yitzchak is coming from the direction, Be'er Lachai Ro'i, of Be'er, the well of Lachai Ro'i. This, just to remind you, is the place where Hagar saw the angel and was and named it this because she was still alive after she saw this angel. And the one who saw her, Ro'i, right? And I am alive. So it's interesting that Isaac, and I think it's going to give a suggestion to the next, to one of Rashi's comments, as you'll see, because that's we would associate Be'er Lachai Ro'i with Hagar, right? V'hu Yoshev be'eretz HaNegev, and he was dwelling in the land of Negev, in the south part of the land. Okay. So let's take a look at Rashi on this. Okay, you'll see. Mavor be'er lachai ro'i, right? From coming from the direction of be'er lachai ro'i. Shahalach lahavi Hagar, because he went to bring Hagar la'Avraham, to Abraham Aviv, his father, sheyisa yisan enha, that he should marry her, which is so interesting, right? These suggestive statements. Hagar, of course, is his stepmother. Hagar is, of course, mother of Ishmael, who was in competition with him. And yet here he is going to, because his mother has died and his father is now without a wife, he's going off to see Hagar, to bring Hagar back so that Abraham can marry her. And of course, that's milking very much the suggestions in this particular verse. And again, for me, it just emphasizes and supports the way of looking at scripture from a much more literary perspective than almost anything else. To just take out and be able to bring out and extract these literary suggestions. Yoshev, and again, it's part of this is the implied question of why is it giving us these details? Why does it have to tell us these particular details? What's it really informing us of? And on a simple level, it really isn't that big a deal. None of these details seem to be that important. But if we're looking at it from more of a literary point of view, then they are important. Then all these details become important. And then trying to extract out the specific detail of what's important. What's the important detail? So again, Yoshev be'eretz HaNegev. He was dwelling in the south land. So Parov la'oto be'er, he was near that well, Shene'emar, where it states earlier on, Vayisa misham Avraham, Abraham journeyed from there, Artsa HaNegev. So again, looking at these similar phrases, right, to the south land, to the land of the south. Vayashov ben Kadesh, and was dwelling between Kadesh uvein Shur and Shur. Visham haya haba'er. And Rashi's telling us this is where this well was located. And again, wells are also very symbolic, right, of important, basic needs. We can certainly talk about the well of Torah, right? Because water is such an important substance for us, which allows us to survive. And another verse, Shene'emar, and it states about this, Hine bein Kadesh uvein Bared. It's the pausal form. It was located between Kadesh and Bared. So here we've got bein Kadesh uvein Shur, right? So Shur and Bared are the same place. They just are just referred to by different names. This is a tradition. And again, this uvein, bein Kadesh, uvein Shur, bein Kadesh, uvein Bared. Notice the similarity of expression here. And this, again, is what supports the Midrashic interpretation. So, onwards. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. And Isaac went out to pray, to meditate in the field, lifnot arev, before evening. So I will tell you that this is the verse that's the basis of why we daven mincha. This is the time of davening mincha, and one of the supports for us praying 3 times a day has to do with these kinds of verses. One associated with Abraham and his going out and praying in the morning, and we have Isaac here in the mid-afternoon, the mid to late afternoon, and then of course Jacob at night, where it says Vayifga bamakom, and that's understood to mean that he was reaching out to the place, capital P, meaning God, and that's the basis on which we daven Mariv. There are 2 basic explanations as to why we pray 3 times a day and the significance of doing that. That's the basis for these particular traditions, is to help us understand why 3, but also what significance they have. And one, of course, is connecting us to our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that we remember there was the verse about Abraham, about Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham teaching his posterity, so that we have this sense of connectedness, which also, of course, underscores the notion of authenticity, that there's this relatively seamless tradition, at least we'd like to see it as seamless, all the way to the founders of our religion, our tradition. So, Vayisa einav vayar, he cast his eyes and he saw v'hinei gemalim ba'im, and he saw camels approaching. So he sees this caravan of camels approaching. Rashi, lasuach, right? That's this verb lasuach. By the way, siach in modern Hebrew means a conversation, right? Lashon tefillah. He says this has the connotation of prayer. And he gives examples. Kamo Tehillim Kuf Bet. This is Psalm 102. Yishpoch Sicho. He pours out his plaint, his prayer to God. So going back here. Vatisa Rivka et Enaha. So look at this, right? We've got this parallel expression, which is suggestive, right? He casts his eyes, she casts her eyes, Rivka casts her eyes, Vatere, she sees et Yitzchak. She sees specifically, well, he's not on a camel. He sees camels. She sees Isaac. By the way, there's this whole idea of seeing, right? That we know that we have that story about Isaac's sight being impaired as he got older, right? So whether there's some foreshadowing in that regard, not sure, just comes out as one looks at this text. Vatipol me al hagamal. And literally, nafal generally means to fall. And I know some people have made a deal out of that, but she alighted from the camel. And Rashi is going to explain to us why they use this particular verb, right? And this is the Aramaic, the itrechinat, which means to sort of let yourself down. But it can also mean to fall. It can mean that too. I checked it out in the Jastrow to see that it depends on the context. So let's go on. I'm not saying that it's impossible to support that interpretation. I just not real comfortable about that idea, partially because it implies a certain disrespect for Isaac, and I don't know that that's necessarily where we want to go. But here we are. Vatera et Yitzchak, right? Vatera et Yitzchak. She saw Isaac. Ra'ata oto hador. I think, or hadur, maybe, right? But I think it could be. As I'm looking at this word, she saw how he was. So maybe his splendor, right? Hadar has the meaning of splendor. So she saw him uh, in this in this sort of splendorous way, the Torah, okay, and she was astonished. There are other manuscripts that say that Tamha, that she was amazed, mipanav, from either his face, right, or his presence. So that's and that certainly is more in context with how we want to understand the level of spirituality and of these particular people. Right? Vatipol. So here Rashi gets into vatipol, right? This strange verb being used here. Ishmita atzma la'aretz. She released herself to the ground. Targumo, as it says in the Targum, in the Aramaic, but itrachinat, right? We saw that word. Okay, so hitita atzma la'aretz. So essentially, she bent herself towards the ground. Velo higia, but she didn't actually touch the ground at this point. Ad hakarka, to the earth, right? She tried to bend down from the camel to the ground, but she didn't quite reach the ground. And that's why they're describing this word vatipol. The more, and here he gives another example of these particular words, their context, right? Hatina, this is actually to Rebecca, where Eliezer says to her, Hatina kadech, right? Inclined or stretch the pitcher, your pitcher towards me, right? Archini, so, right. And that's the Aramaic translation, right? And again in Samuel, the second book of Samuel, chapter 22, Vayet Shamayim Va'archim. He bent down the heavens, he inclined the heavens, and there's the Hebrew, the Aramaic, Va'archin. Lashon muta la'aretz. So it has the meaning of being inclined to the earth. Vedomelo, and again, there are other similar examples. Look at the trouble that Rashi's going to try and give us a better understanding of what this word means, right? Vedomelo, and it's very similar to ki yipol lo yutal. There's the word yutal and the word yipol, right? Although it falls, it will not be utterly cast down. So, see if there's any more Rashi on this. Here we go. Klomar, that is to say, im yater la'aretz, if it is inclined to the ground, lo yagia ad hakarka, it will not actually reach the ground itself, which is exactly how he's translating the Hebrew here regarding Rebecca. In other words, she sort of stretched down to get off the camel, but wasn't quite reaching it. And maybe that's the reason why it says tipol, because from that point on to get to the ground, she actually did have to fall off the camel, right? It wasn't falling off the camel, but the motion from that point on was, you might call it a fall. Let's see here. We want to go back a little bit. Vatomer el ha'eved, she said to the servant, Mi ha'ish halazeh, who is this man, ha'holech basadeh likratenu, who is going in the field to meet us? Vayomer ha'eved, and the servant said, Hu Adoni, he is my Lord. Vatikach, and she took Hatzaif, her veil, Vatitkas, and she covered herself. So again, the idea, of course, you ask yourself, well, what does that represent? And it represents modesty. And by the way, this is the basis. Again, the idea of connecting ourselves to our ancestors. It gives us a little bit more of a place of gravitas, but the idea of a bride, a Jewish bride, covering her face with a veil. So again, these are things that one can meditate about and think about, as to their significance. Vatitkas, right? She literally means she covered herself. Lashon vatitpael. So he says there is a passive sense to this verb here. Kamo, as it says, vatikaver was buried, vatishaber, and it was broken. So that it has a sense of, while it means she covered herself or she became, well, I'm trying to think of a better English way to put it, right? So that she was covered. By Saper ha'eved liYitzchak, and the servant recounted to Yitzchak, to Isaac, et kol hadvarim, all the things, asher asa, which he had done. By Saper ha'eved, the servant recounted. And Bereshit Rabbah, Gila lo nisim. So he revealed, literally, legalot generally means to reveal. He revealed to him the miracles, shina asulo, that were performed for him. Here they are. Shekaftsa lo haaretz. Number one, literally it means that the land jumped to him, meaning that his journey was so short, it was so brief, right? So that's how they describe a long journey that turns out to take a very, very short time, a miraculously short time. V'shenizdamna lo Rivka, and that Rivka showed up for him, b'tfilato, through his prayer. Vayavi'eha Yitzchak ha'ohela Sarah imo, and Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah his mother. Vayikach et Rivka, he took Rebecca, meaning he married Rebecca. Vatihi lo leisha, and she was his wife. She became his wife. Veyehaveha, and he loved her. Vayinachem Yitzchak, and Isaac was comforted, acharei imo, after his mother. Ha'ohela Sarah imo, right? The tent of Sarah his mother. Vayavieha ha'ohela, that he brought her to the tent, right? He brought Rebecca to the tent. V'harei hi Sarah imo, and it's as if it's saying that Rebecca became like Sarah, his mother, that it's trying to compare Rebecca to Sarah, his mother. Okay. So in other words, it's as if it's saying he brought to the tent Sarah, his mother, but he's bringing Rebecca. So this is what it means. Klomar, that's what we're trying to say. The ne'eseh dugmat Sarah imor, and she became similar, right? The example of Sarah, his mother, shekol zman shesara kayemet, because as long as Sarah was in existence, haya ner daluk, there was a light, a candle burning, may erev Shabbat le erev Shabbat, from one Friday to the next Friday. Again, symbolic, right? That you think about the association of light, that the idea of comfort and the ability to get around comfortably. The reason, by the way, given for Shabbat candles, And although we've made a ritual out of it more than anything else, but obviously this started before incandescent lights. The idea of having light in the home, despite the fact that we're told that we're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat, but the rabbis understood this to mean that you're not actually allowed to kindle, to do anything remotely connected to kindling a fire. But if you start that fire before Shabbat, it is not a prohibition to have light in your home from something like a burning candle. And by the way, this was disputed. There were those who took it in a different way and it basically worked around in the dark. And the rabbis felt that if Shabbat was to be shalom, if one was to experience peace in your home, not bumping into things, bumping into people, not being able to really negotiate your space, wasn't Shabbat. And so that's why they even went as far as making a mitzvah about making sure that there was light in the home. So again, you can apply that to this particular expression here, that there was always light in her home. You could see where you were going. And of course, understanding that both physically and spiritually. Uvracha mitzuya be'isa, and a blessing found in her dough. Now, what this is, as I've understood, the word bracha basically has the connotation of plenitude. So in other words, she always had enough dough to do whatever baking she had to do. In other words, it has to do with the amount of dough that she always was able to have at her disposal to make sure that she was able to feed people. And again, generally, when you're thinking of an Isa, you're thinking of bread, right? Basic sustenance. Third thing, so these things were now happening. Anan kashur al ha'oel, and a cloud tied to the tent, right? And the idea, okay, sorry, let me finish with this phrase, and the idea of protection, right? We read about the sukkah that we put up on Sukkot as representing the ananei kavod, the clouds of God's presence, and the idea of protection. So this cloud here has to do with the presence of God in a protecting kind of way. And these all were happening on account of Sarah's being present there. And now that she had passed, right? Umisha Meta, right? When she passed away, Pasku, they all left. They no longer were there. Ukeshebat Rivka Chazru. But when Rivka arrived, they all returned.
Yeah. How come? Well, I've never heard that talked about at Sukkot. That would be lovely. Mm-hmm. Maybe when you talk about Ushpizin.
Yeah, right. I think there would be a connection there, certainly. Yeah. It is one of the reasons given. One of the reasons given of the symbolism of the Sukkah, of course, is that our ancestors dwelt in Sukkot, but there's absolutely another reason given, which is they represent the Ananei Kavod, the protection that God had for the Israelites when they were wandering through the desert.
Thank you.
Sure. So, and then Acharei Imo, after his mother. So look at how they are parsing out every little part of this sentence. And of course, at this point, I would think you're pretty used to this, right? So Derech Eretz, Rashi comments that in the normal course of events, this is common, human experience, calls man she'il shel adam, that as long as a person's mother kayemet, she exists, right? She's living. Karuch hu etzla. He's literally, it means wrapped up in her. So the idea, right, of a son and a son's relationship to his mother. Umisha meta. However, once she passes away, hu mitnachem, he can become comforted beishto, through his wife. So the idea of, the relationship of a husband to a wife and a husband to his mother, and how that transition appears, and that this is something that is just universal. And I'll be happy to take questions, but I think we will stop here for today and be ready to start a new chapter. And tomorrow's Wednesday, and I checked with my daughter, and we will not meet tomorrow. But God willing, I will see you Thursday. And let me just stop the share.
I just wanted to share a thought about the dough.
Yes.
The bracha might mean abundance, but I've started baking sourdough bread, and it occurs to me that it might refer to the leavening power of the dough. Because once you've got a dough, that's your dough. And if it's a good, strong leavening agent, then you're going to have nice bread. And if it's not so much. So it might have to do with the power of the dough.
Yes, yes. Of course, you also make matzah with dough too, right? Which is not leavening, but I still think, it's beautiful. What you just shared was, I think, significant too. And also when you're cooking food, how does it turn out? How delicious does it turn out to be? But Rashi's giving us this particular take on it. Okay, let's stop the recording.